The Broken Compass, MI6’s hunt for a rogue insider. Before we begin, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Comment below and subscribe to follow the secrets hidden in shadows. The voice echoed softly as the camera panned over London's fog-laden streets, the dim glow of gas lamps cutting through the mist. MI6’s headquarters loomed like a fortress, unremarkable from the outside, but a hive of precision and secrecy within. Jonathan Hale, a junior analyst barely out of training, stood in the silent briefing room, clutching a dossier that felt heavier than the concrete walls surrounding him. The operation they were about to commence was delicate, almost surgical, aimed at uncovering a rogue insider whose betrayal had the potential to compromise missions spanning continents. His handler, a veteran operative named Evelyn Cross, moved with the ease and confidence born of decades in intelligence. She placed a steady hand on the dossier and looked him in the eyes. Everything you know about navigation, trust, and observation will be tested. One misstep, one wrong assumption, and you'll not only lose the trail, you may never know it existed. The briefing was concise. The insider had disappeared 2 weeks prior, leaving behind a string of cryptic communications and altered intelligence files, each a breadcrumb that could either lead to discovery or an ambush. Jonathan traced the lines of coded messages, noticing patterns that suggested familiarity with the agency's deepest protocols. It was not merely espionage. 'Twas betrayal woven into the fabric of MI6 itself. As he stepped into the narrow corridors of the intelligence hub, his footsteps echoed like a drumbeat of impending tension, each sound swallowed almost instantly by the omnipresent silence. Surveillance feeds flickered across banks of monitors. Agents moved with practiced precision, and yet there was an invisible thread of honest knowledge that a mole, someone with intimate understanding of MI6’s operations, was still at large. The vanishing point, as the operation was internally coded, referred not to a physical location, but to the elusive disappearance of information, of patterns, of lives intersecting within classified channels. Jonathan's eyes scanned dossiers, cross-referenced intercepted messages, and attempted to anticipate the rogue insider's next move. Every anomaly, every subtle deviation in protocol became a potential clue, a faint signal hidden in plain sight. Night fell over Whitehall, the city's historic facades bathed in orange haze from streetlights. And the operation shifted into motion. Agents deployed in teams, each assigned to shadow suspected points of contact, vehicles equipped with encrypted communication lines and tracking systems. Jonathan monitored feeds from multiple locations simultaneously, the weight of responsibility pressing down, a quiet tension permeating the air like electricity before a storm. As he pored over intercepted transmissions, a subtle inconsistency caught his attention, a phrase repeated across multiple channels, slightly altered each time, as though the sender was signaling but hiding in the nuances. Evelyn noticed his focus. "You see it?" she whispered. "This is the signature of someone who knows the rules intimately but is daring you to catch them. It's not brute force, it's finesse, intelligence, and cunning." Hours passed in a blur of calculations, tracking coordinates, and decoding minute alterations. The city outside was unaware that its streets had become a chessboard, its lights and shadows a theater where hidden players moved unseen. Jonathan realized that catching the insider required not just following evidence, but understanding motive, psychology, and the subtle art of misdirection. In the early hours, a breakthrough emerged, a meeting point suggested in the digital breadcrumbs. The fog clung stubbornly to the canals of London, a silent shroud that blurred the boundary between reality and deception. Jonathan Hale, now deep into the hunt for the rogue insider, could feel the tension of the operation in every step. His eyes scanned encrypted messages flickering across multiple monitors, their seemingly mundane content hiding layers of misdirection. The documents, emails, and intercepted communications were riddled with subtle alterations, each one a breadcrumb meant to lure the unwary into false assumptions. Evelyn Cross, ever vigilant, moved beside him like a shadow, her gaze piercing. reading the hidden narratives behind every code, every carefully placed word. "In espionage," she whispered, "truth is a mask. If you can't see the mask, you won't see the danger behind it." The team had divided their attention into 3 streams: digital surveillance, human assets, and historical intelligence records. Each layer was a separate world of signals, some real, some planted, all requiring meticulous attention to distinguish. Jonathan had learned quickly that a single overlooked anomaly could unravel weeks of careful tracking, exposing the agents in the field to danger and allowing the insider to slip further into the shadows. Hours turned into a night that seemed eternal, punctuated only by the soft hum of servers, the click of keyboards, and the occasional crackle of encrypted radios. The messages themselves were the most deceptive element. Innocuous phrases repeated in emails and memos, slight punctuation changes, even the absence of a word could signal a rendezvous point, a shift in plan, or a warning to the insider that MI6 was closing in. Jonathan stared at one particular email for what felt like an eternity, tracing the sender's patterns, comparing them with previous communications, and slowly realizing that the rogue had an intimate understanding of the agency's internal procedures. Each letter, each symbol, each timing of delivery had a deliberate purpose, a calculated misdirection designed to frustrate those trying to follow the trail. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the hidden war being waged in its heart. Shadows stretched along the cobblestones and canal waters, reflecting lanterns and fractured shapes, mirroring the fragmented reality Jonathan and his team were navigating. They moved with caution through narrow streets and alleys, each shadow a potential threat, each passerby a possible observer or asset. Evelyn intercepted a whispered tip from an informant stationed miles away, a cryptic remark that instantly aligned with a series of subtle anomalies Jonathan had been mapping. The synergy between field intel and digital tracking illuminated a hidden pattern. A rendezvous point near a long-abandoned MI6 safehouse, its existence erased from official records, but alive in the memories of retired operatives and archives. The complexity of the rogue insider's movements became clearer. Every message was a mask, every meeting a test, and every false led a potential trap. Jonathan's pulse quickened as they prepared to surveil the location. Disguises were perfected, vehicles calibrated for silent observation, and communication lines encrypted to prevent interception. The insider's mastery of MI6 protocols was evident in the slight misalignments in the messages, the hidden cues, and the deceptive timing. As the night deepened, Jonathan reflected on the delicate balance between deception and detection. Every agent in the field, every operative in the shadows, was playing a part in a game where the stakes were invisible but lethal. The rogue insider was not merely fleeing. They were leading MI6 through a labyrinth of their own design, testing not only the skills but the instincts of every operative involved. And then, as the team observed from hidden positions along the misty canals, a figure emerged at the rendezvous point, moving with a calm precision that betrayed both confidence and danger. Jonathan recognized the small, deliberate gestures, the folding of a note, the subtle signaling of a companion, the timing of each step. "Messages in disguise," Evelyn murmured, "is what they do best. They speak without words, and they move without sound." Now watch closely. Every detail matters. For hours, they observed, recording, cross-referencing, and decoding every motion. The insider's communications extended beyond written or digital forms. Even the positioning of objects, the placement of shadows, and reflections in water became messages to those trained to see them. Jonathan's understanding deepened. Espionage was as much an art as a science, a ballet of observation, intuition, and calculated risk. By dawn, fragments of a larger pattern began to emerge, revealing that the rogue insider's movements were leading to a convergence of intelligence assets. A carefully orchestrated attempt to destabilize MI6 operations from within. The revelation was chilling. The insider was not just hiding, they were directing a web of misinformation, leading the agency to believe in false threats while diverting attention from a true plan, one that could compromise agents across multiple continents. Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The vanishing point was no longer a distant concept. It was here, manifested in the rogue's ability to manipulate messages, perceptions, and trust. As the sun began to rise over the canals, casting pale light through the dissipating mist, Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on Jonathan's shoulder. This is just the beginning. Messages in disguise are their language, and every move they make is a test. We follow, we observe, and we prepare. Soon, the pieces will align, and the truth behind the mask will be revealed. Cobblestone into a reflective fragment of light and shadow. Jonathan Hale moved cautiously along the narrow alleys that ran like veins beneath the city, the weight of MI6's mission pressing heavily against his chest. The rogue insider had left an invisible trail, one so subtle that only the most meticulous observation could detect its rhythm, its patterns, its secrets hidden in plain sight. Evelyn Cross shadowed him closely, her eyes scanning every window, every doorway, every figure that flickered at the edge of the mist. "The insider isn't just hiding," she murmured. "They're shaping the environment around them, manipulating perception. You have to see the shadows, not the person. The insider's shadow," as the team had begun to call it, was less a physical presence than an almost spectral force manifest in subtle cues, coded gestures, and the manipulation of information. Jonathan examined intercepted communications on his handheld device, noticing minor but deliberate deviations, a comma replaced by a semicolon. The sequence of numbers altered, timestamps shifted by minute-solid breadcrumbs, forming a hidden narrative for those trained to read it. The streets seemed to echo the insider's influence. Cars parked strategically, streetlights flickering at precise intervals. Even the placement of market stalls appearing almost choreographed to misdirect surveillance. Jonathan's mind raced as he mapped the city in layers of observation. The physical paths, the digital footprints, the emotional signals that might betray intent. Every shadow along the walls of the narrow alleys could be a message, a trap, or simply a test, and deciphering which was which demanded the full focus of an operative trained in espionage and human psychology. Midway through the night, a subtle reflection in a shop window caught Jonathan's eye, a fleeting figure, blurred and indistinct, pausing in a manner that seemed deliberate yet fleeting. He signaled Evelyn, who adjusted her angle. Silently confirming what he already suspected, the insider was aware they were being watched, guiding MI6’s attention without ever revealing themselves. The pattern of movement, the placement of objects, the timing of seemingly mundane events formed a language, a code written in shadows. Jonathan realized that following the insider required more than surveillance. It required understanding their mindset, anticipating their motives, and thinking in the same convoluted logic that had allowed them to operate undetected. They moved through abandoned warehouses, darkened wharves, and fog-enshrouded bridges, each location a theater where every detail had meaning. Jonathan noticed a subtle alignment between old MI6 archival files and current street patterns. The insider was recreating historical operations as camouflage, blending old knowledge with new intent, weaving deception into the city's very geography. The team set up covert observation points, monitoring signals on encrypted channels, noting anomalies in traffic, in delivery schedules, and in pedestrian movements. A courier carrying messages in disguised parcels was intercepted briefly on a camera feed. The package seemed ordinary, yet analysis revealed hidden compartments and microdots containing instructions, coordinates, and warnings. Evelyn guided Jonathan's attention to the nuances of body language, the slight pause before turning a corner, the careful placement of a hand on a lamppost, the deliberate avoidance of reflections. Each action spoke volumes, and reading these cues was as critical as decoding digital communications. As dawn approached, the insider's manipulations became increasingly audacious. creating false trails and intentional contradictions. Jonathan realized the game was now psychological as much as tactical. MI6 was being tested for its discernment, patience, and interpretive skill. The insider's shadow was everywhere, yet nowhere, a phantom orchestrating the city's minutiae to their advantage. Jonathan felt the intensity heighten as a shadow detached itself from the alley wall, moving independently, yet aligning perfectly with the insider's previously mapped patterns. Evelyn whispered, "Watch the signals in motion." Jonathan: "Sometimes the path is not where they go, but where they want you to look." Every observation, every note, every flicker of movement was cataloged, cross-referenced, and analyzed. The rogue insider's mastery of misdirection was evident in every layer of the operation. The physical trail was deceptive, the digital trail fragmented, and the emotional trail orchestrated to mislead. By the early morning, Jonathan and Evelyn had begun to assemble a partial picture, a mental map that traced the insider's influence across multiple neighborhoods, surveillance networks, and historical MI6 knowledge. The realization was chilling. The insider's shadow extended far beyond a single operative or department. It permeated systems, contacts, and even the unspoken rules of engagement within the agency. As the first light of dawn diffused through the fog, Jonathan paused atop a narrow bridge, watching the water below shimmer with distorted reflections. The shadow of the insider seemed to ripple across every surface, a reminder that in the world of espionage, not all dangers were tangible, and not all threats were visible. Evelyn placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "The insider's shadow is a living network, Jonathan. They are not just a person, they are a method, a strategy, and a ghost. To catch them, we must anticipate their logic, think like them, and remain invisible ourselves." Jonathan inhaled deeply, the cold morning air filling his lungs, and understood the truth of her words. This hunt was no longer a simple pursuit. It had evolved into a duel of intellects, intuition, and perception. The shadow would test every skill they had, every lesson learned in MI6 training, and every ounce of courage they possessed. The rogue insider's influence stretched across the city through hidden signals, encoded movements, and invisible threads connecting past and present operations. Jonathan and Evelyn descended the bridge's steps, moving deeper into the foggy labyrinth. Knowing that every step forward brought them closer to revelation, yet also deeper into the complexity of deception. Every street corner, every reflected light, every whispered signal had become a piece of the puzzle. And as the city stirred awake, oblivious to the unseen chessboard being played among its shadows, Jonathan realized the hunt for the insider was not just a mission, it was a confrontation with the very essence of secrecy itself, where the smallest misstep could unravel everything, and where every shadow carried the weight of truth and betrayal. Night descended over Whitehall like a velvet curtain, muting the sounds of the city and leaving only whispers and distant echoes. Jonathan Hale and Evelyn Cross moved through the labyrinthine streets with calculated precision, the glow from the street lamps barely piercing the thick London fog. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if aware of their presence, and every reflected light on the wet cobblestones became a potential signal from the rogue insider they were hunting. The briefing had been simple, yet chilling. Infiltrate key government zones, observe suspicious movements, intercept communications, and above all, remain invisible. But as Jonathan advanced into the heart of the district, he felt the weight of history pressing in. Whitehall was not just a center of political power. It was a maze of secrets, passages, and hidden vantage points, some of which had been used by MI6 operatives for decades. Here, the rogue insider could blend with the ordinary flow of night shift couriers, maintenance staff, and occasional late-night politicians, making detection almost impossible. The vanishing point, their prior focus, now merged with the complexity of these historic streets. Each step Jonathan took was measured. Every corner turned with caution. Evelyn led him to a concealed observation post atop an old government building, where they could monitor activity without drawing attention. From this perch, the geometry of Whitehall unfolded like a map layered with shadows. They had access to digital surveillance feeds, but Evelyn emphasized that intuition and human observation were just as vital. "Technology can show you the footprints," she murmured. "But only perception reveals the pattern of intent." Jonathan studied the network of alleys, side streets, and pedestrian thoroughfares, correlating it with intercepted communications. A subtle discrepancy in a routine delivery schedule caught his attention: a courier who appeared at the wrong side entrance, carrying a seemingly ordinary satchel. Jonathan's instincts told him that this was no coincidence. Someone with intimate knowledge of MI6 operations was orchestrating events to mislead them. Hours stretched on as they tracked minor anomalies: misplaced trash bins, oddly timed street cleaning, subtle light flickers on government windows. Each seemingly trivial detail formed a constellation of signs pointing toward the insider's calculated manipulations. The tension mounted as they coordinated with field agents stationed across Whitehall, their encrypted communications a lifeline in the night. Agents moved silently, their positions shifting with every alert, yet even they were unaware of the full scope of the insider's reach. Jonathan reviewed intercepted messages on his device, decoding minute shifts in language, timing, and sequence. Evelyn watched him with quiet intensity. "They speak without speaking," she reminded him. "Every delivery, every movement, every pattern carries meaning. The trick is to anticipate, not react." As midnight approached, a faint figure appeared near the ministry building, a lone operative, moving with a deliberate calm. Jonathan's pulse quickened. The movements matched the subtle cues in the intercepted messages, the hidden rhythms that had eluded them for weeks. It was an intricate dance of observation and concealment, where misjudgment could not only fail the mission, but endanger lives. Jonathan and Evelyn coordinated the agents' positions, forming a silent perimeter while maintaining discretion. From their vantage point, they could see how the rogue insider orchestrated signals for accomplices. Gestures barely perceptible, reflections in polished windows, objects placed to communicate without a single word. The city itself had become a canvas for deception, each building, alley, and lamppost a brushstroke in a complex narrative only the trained eye could interpret. Jonathan realized that this operation was no longer about catching a single individual. It was about understanding the system they had manipulated, predicting every contingency, and moving with perfect synchronization. The insider's mastery was evident in the seamless blending of physical and informational signals, the perfect timing of every event, and the almost artistic misdirection embedded in routine urban patterns. As the night deepened, Jonathan's mind raced through all the possibilities, considering psychological profiles, behavioral tendencies, and historical MI6 knowledge. The city was alive with messages hidden in plain sight, yet the ultimate truth remained elusive. Evelyn guided him through a mental checklist, reinforcing the principles of perception, patience, and pattern recognition. "Trust your instincts," she said softly. "The insider's shadow is not just in the streets or the signals it is, in the way the mind perceives them." The tension reached a climax when a minor breach of protocol was observed: a courier making a misstep, an unexpected deviation from the predicted pattern. Jonathan signaled the field team, ready to act, yet Evelyn cautioned restraint. The rogue insider was testing them, orchestrating distractions and probing MI6's responsiveness. Every action they took now had to be precise, deliberate, and calculated. The hours passed in a blur of observation, communication, and deduction. The interplay of light and shadow, reflections on the wet streets, and subtle signals formed a narrative that Jonathan could barely comprehend in its entirety. Yet, piece by piece, he began to reconstruct the larger design, understanding not just where the insider had been, but what they intended next. As the first pale light of dawn touched the rooftops, Jonathan and Evelyn remained vigilant, the city awakening around them, unaware of the unseen battle that had raged through its streets all night. The rogue insider's influence lingered like a ghost in Whitehall, testing every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of patience the team possessed. And in that quiet moment, before the world fully stirred, Jonathan understood the profound truth of MI6 operations. Intelligence was not just about knowledge. It was about anticipation, perception, and the courage to move through shadows when the path was invisible. The night on Whitehall had revealed fragments of the insider's strategy, and Jonathan knew that the chase was far from over. Every shadow could conceal a clue, every light might betray a signal, and every silent step could lead them closer to uncovering a betrayal that reached into the heart of the agency itself. The night deepened over London, yet the glow of scattered street lamps reflected off the slick pavements like fragmented constellations. Guiding Jonathan, Hale and Evelyn crossed through a city that was both familiar and alien under the cover of darkness. Their focus had shifted from observation to discovery, the hunt. For the rogue insider had led them to an unassuming archive tucked behind layers of bureaucracy. A place whispered about only in the quietest corridors of MI6. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and secrecy. A physical manifestation of decades of intelligence meticulously gathered and meticulously hidden. The secret ledger, as it had been cryptically referred to in briefings, was said to contain the fingerprints of operations too sensitive for digital storage, files too critical to risk in any electronic system. Evelyn guided Jonathan through the reinforced doors and into a narrow passage where security measures seemed almost ornamental. Each lock, code, and biometric scanner serving as a reminder that every step forward carried potential consequences. "This ledger," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of history, "is not just paper. It is the echo of every operation, every agent, every betrayal that has shaped MI6. To understand the insider's intent, you must see the connections hidden within these pages." Rows upon rows of metal cabinets loomed like silent sentinels, their surfaces etched with coded identifiers that required not just knowledge but intuition to decipher. Jonathan and Evelyn worked silently, cross-referencing physical documents with digital files, mapping anomalies and tracing patterns the rogue insider had left deliberately to mislead, distract, or protect themselves. Every entry told a story: missions conducted in shadow, communications sent across borders, coded messages that had never reached their intended recipients. The ledger was alive with the past, each page a pulse of history that had been curated with precision. Yet the rogue insider had infiltrated this system, leaving subtle hints of their presence in annotations, altered dates, and marginal symbols that could easily be dismissed by anyone less attuned. Jonathan's eyes scanned a ledger entry dated over a decade ago. A seemingly trivial note about courier movements, yet the insider had inserted subtle ciphered markings, a deliberate misalignment intended to draw attention away from their current manipulations. Evelyn observed his reaction and nodded. Patterns in the past often illuminate the present. See the ledger not just for what it says, but for what it hides, and for what it implies about the mind of the insider. Hours passed in meticulous examination. The team traced minor discrepancies in operational reports, financial records, and assignment schedules. Each revelation painted a clearer picture of the insider's network, revealing methods of communication, hidden rendezvous points, and the careful orchestration of misdirection that had allowed them to evade detection for so long. Jonathan marveled at the precision of the rogue's approach, every action calculated to create uncertainty. Every message a puzzle that required both intellect and intuition to decode. Evelyn guided him to a hidden compartment within a cabinetta, false back containing microfiche slides, tiny ledgers, and encoded notes. The contents hinted at upcoming operations, some of which could destabilize field agents if the insider's influence was not contained. "This is what makes them dangerous," Evelyn said, her tone taut with both caution and respect. "They operate across layers of reality, digital, physical, and psychological, and they never leave anything unintentional. Everything has meaning if you know how to read it." Jonathan meticulously photographed, cataloged, and cross-referenced the materials, Feeling the weight of history and the immediacy of threat converge. Each symbol, each shorthand, each subtle irregularity demanded analysis, forcing him to consider not just operational knowledge but the psychology and foresight of the insider. Meanwhile, outside the ledger room, London slept unaware of the invisible war unfolding in its heart. The fog shrouded the canals, the streets, and the alleys, masking the movements of agents and insiders alike. But within the archive, the ledger held a silent power, the ability to expose, to reveal, and to guide those trained to interpret its hidden language. Jonathan traced a series of notations that indicated the insider's intent to manipulate intelligence flows, mislead MI6 teams, and create opportunities to act from within the system. Evelyn explained that every cryptic mark was a calculated step in a grand chess game, a game that had played out over months, even years, without detection. The team realized that capturing the rogue insider would require not only confronting the individual, but anticipating their strategy, understanding the layers of deception, and predicting moves that had yet to be executed. As they worked, Jonathan began to see the ledger not just as a collection of facts, but as a living map of human behavior, intelligence strategy, and clandestine manipulation. Every page turned, every cipher decoded, was a step closer to understanding the mind behind the shadows. By dawn, they had reconstructed a partial framework of the insider's network, identifying safe houses, contacts, and conduits through which misinformation flowed. But the ledger was also a warning. For every insight gained, the insider had anticipated countermeasures, leaving contingencies designed to test, trap, and mislead MI6 operatives. Evelyn looked at Jonathan with a steely resolve. We are not just observers now. The ledger has given us a lens into their mind, but it also signals that the confrontation is imminent. Every step, every message, every piece of intelligence we've gathered brings us closer to understanding their pattern and to stopping them. Jonathan understood the weight of her words. The secret ledger was more than a collection of past operations. 'Twas the roadmap to the insider's present actions and the key to thwarting their carefully orchestrated schemes. And reflecting off the canals, Jonathan realized that the hunt for the rogue insider had reached a critical juncture. Every shadow, every encoded message, every whispered signal carried significance. The ledger had revealed secrets, guided their pursuit, and warned of dangers. And the true test would be whether MI6 could anticipate the insider's next move before it was too late. The operation had entered its final stages. The stakes had never been higher, and the delicate balance between deception and discovery would determine the outcome of a pursuit that had already stretched the limits of espionage, patience, and courage. The air in the abandoned MI6 safe house was thick with anticipation, mingling with the scent of damp concrete and old paper. Jonathan Hale and Evelyn Cross moved silently through the shadowed corridors, their senses sharpened by weeks of surveillance, deduction, and careful anticipation. Outside, London slept under a blanket of fog and streetlight, unaware that a confrontation that could shake the very core of MI6 was about to unfold within its heart. Every creak of the floorboards, every echo of dripping water, was amplified in the silence. A reminder that the rogue insider was no longer just a distant threat, but a presence somewhere in the same building. They had traced the insider's steps through a labyrinth of false leads, hidden rendezvous points, and encoded communications, and now all evidence converged on this one location. Evelyn signaled to Jonathan to check the perimeters, her hands steady despite the tension in the air. They were both acutely aware that the insider was not only skilled in misdirection but had anticipated countermeasures at every turn, a ghost moving in parallel with their own investigation. The safe house itself was a relic of past operations: worn walls, steel-reinforced doors, and concealed observation rooms. Jonathan could almost sense the layers of history embedded in the structure. Every scratch, dent, and mark had a story, a memory of agents past who had walked these halls. And now they were part of that story, stepping carefully into the unknown. Jonathan and Evelyn moved toward the inner chamber, where the final confrontation was expected. Surveillance feeds flickered faintly on their devices, showing only shadows, subtle movements, and the occasional glint of reflective surfaces, yet their instincts told them more than the screens ever could. Every anomaly, every subtle signal, every flicker of light was part of a coded narrative the insider had left, both a taunt and a guide. They paused before the reinforced steel door that marked the threshold to the inner sanctum. Jonathan's hand hovered over the biometric scanner, aware that this was more than technology. It was a test of composure, of focus, of the ability to act decisively under pressure. The scanner recognized him, and with a pneumatic hiss, the door slowly opened to reveal a room bathed in a muted, eerie glow. The interior was meticulously arranged. Desks with encrypted devices, secure cabinets, and a wall covered in surveillance monitors, all alive with streams of information. And there, in the center of the room, stood the rogue insider, a figure perfectly calm, almost detached, observing the screens as though the intruders were expected all along. Jonathan froze for a heartbeat, studying the individual who had eluded MI6 for so long. Evelyn whispered, "Remember, Jonathan? They thrive on control and anticipation. One wrong move, one visible reaction, and they could manipulate this entire encounter." The insider turned slowly, eyes meeting Jonathan's with a calculated intensity that seemed to measure, weigh, and test. Every motion, every expression was precise, designed to unsettle, to assert dominance. Yet beneath the calm veneer lay a mind trained in decades of espionage, deception, and strategic foresight. Jonathan and Evelyn moved cautiously, positioning themselves to observe and communicate silently. The room seemed to shrink around them, the shadows lengthening as the fog from outside crept under the door and mingled with the muted glow of monitors. "You've come far," the insider said, voice low but steady, almost conversational. "But understanding patterns isn't enough. Anticipation is meaningless without execution. Are you ready to act on what you've learned?" Jonathan's heart pounded, but his mind remained clear. He had followed every trace, every signal, every subtle cue, and now it all converged into this decisive moment. The final confrontation was not merely a physical encounter. It was a test of intellect, intuition, and the ability to move within the shadows without revealing oneself. Evelyn moved slightly, signaling Jonathan to watch for micro-movements, the slight shift of the insider's weight, the almost imperceptible hand gestures, the way their gaze traced the periphery of the room. Jonathan initiated the first step, approaching the desk with deliberate calm, eyes scanning every detail, memorizing every object, every device, every potential threat. The insider watched, subtly adjusting posture, their calculated composure a mirror to Jonathan's own focus. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds became minutes as the room held its breath. Then, with a barely perceptible motion, the insider activated a hidden panel, revealing microfiche slides, encrypted drives, and documents the physical manifestation of the rogue's accumulated manipulations. Jonathan quickly cataloged the materials, understanding that the value of what lay before them extended beyond exposure. It was intelligence, operational insight, and confirmation of methods that had been hidden for months. Evelyn whispered, "Now, Jonathan, use what the ledger taught you. Interpret, predict, control. The moment is yours." A delicate, silent dance began, each movement deliberate, strategic, and precise. The insider attempted subtle psychological maneuver shifts in tone, misleading glances, and carefully timed pause. But Jonathan and Evelyn had been trained for this. The room seemed to contract as tension mounted. A theater of shadows where intellect was weaponized, intuition became armor, and perception determined outcome. Then, finally, the insider hesitated. A slight miscalculation, just enough for Jonathan to act decisively. They secured the rogue, neutralizing the immediate threat without endangering lives or compromising critical intelligence. As dawn broke over London, Light filtering through the high windows of the safe house, the atmosphere shifted from tension to cautious relief. This is the nature of intelligence work. Control, observation, patience, and understanding are everything. Remember what you've learned. Jonathan exhaled slowly. The weight of the night lifting, yet the memory of every shadow, every subtle signal, every silent test etched firmly into his mind. Outside, the city awoke, unaware of the battle waged in its shadows. The operation had ended, but the lessons remained. Vigilance, interpretation, and the courage to navigate the unseen would always define the work of MI6.